consider anything else, which I felt I was sitting here feeling a bit guilty that I left everybody thinking everybody was so depressed about it. But in order to move on, I think you've got to start and say goodbye to the old. And as we started to think what the future would hold, we had to come up with some practical suggestions. Financially, it wasn't going to be possible to restore the church, and even if we had, financially, it wouldn't have been possible to sustain it. And so we had to look around and think what else could be done. We had a certain amount of money. There is a certain amount of expertise in and around the village. But what we started to do was to start and ask people if they would help, and nobody said no. And so the church was starting to move out, if you like, to see who we needed to ask. And gradually the vision of what we might manage came about.
And we are back in with Emerging Emmaus podcast. It is so great to have you with us. And would you believe it, we have a full complement of team with us today. We've got Neil Urquhart and Steve is back with us, Steve Aisthorpe. So you have got a full team with you today, but where are we today? I can hear you asking the question, who's with us? Where are they from? And this is one of the great things about this podcast. We can go all around the country from the comfort of our living rooms, or the bikes, or the running trails, or the cars, or wherever you listen to this. And today we are actually away up in the northwest peninsula of Scotland, and we are going to be joined with Ella Gill and Donald McCorkindale from the Kilchoan area. The parish where you are working and ministering is, in fact, why don't you go for it? Because you'll be far better saying these names than I am. Whereabouts in the country are you?
Well, Fort William is probably a place that many can have a rough idea of where that is. We're on the other side of Loch Linnhe, across on the peninsula. So I've been minister here for 12 years and was inducted in 2011 to Ardgour, Strontian and Morvern. And with all the presbytery mission planning that's been going on, those three parishes united to form Ardgour, Morvern and Strontian Parish Church, which is now linked with Acharacal and Ardnamurchan, which similarly had been two separate parishes that were linked, now united, which means that I have responsibility for a huge area. I've kept saying that it amounts to something like 2% of the area of Scotland, and was writing something just the other day, and I thought I really must check that out. And having done the maths, it's actually more than 2% of the area of Scotland. So a huge area taking us right out to the most westerly point of mainland Britain, Ardnamurchan Point. And it's not far from there where the new Ardnamurchan Church will be dedicated tomorrow, 13th of September, when you're listening to this in the future.
And this is why we are listening to your story today, because we wanted to chat with you about your new building, because it's not just a new building. It's, I suppose, in one way, the manifestation of a faith walk over a journey of time that can really help us. Before we get into that part of the journey, I think it might be really helpful for both you, Ella, and Donald to let us know a little bit more about the area, the rurality of it, the remoteness, the people, the kind of the lifestyle. And then maybe Steve, because you've got a vested interest in this area, you could give us a bit of your opinion about that land and that area as well, coming in with fresh eyes. So Ella, why don't you paint us a picture? What's the land like?
Well, we would be classed as very remote and rural. Single track roads, which means some negotiating either when there are tourists around or during the winter time as well. when I was involved in the presbytery planning, I stopped putting the miles down between places and just put the time down between places. Because if you've got ferries to negotiate and single track roads and tourists and sheep and cows, then that's the important thing. It's the time that gets you from one place to another. As far as employment is concerned, there are a lot of people involved in the tourist industry, and I would say now the biggest employer would be the fish farm, Maui, the fish farm people. At one time it would have been forestry, but I think now the biggest employer would be Maui. Would you say so?
Yes.
So a lot of people who work in the area may have more than one job if they're not employed by Maui and they're just relying on tourism and so forth. So multiple different sorts of employment. The youngsters, we have schools on the peninsula, high school, as well as the primary school, and so a lot of them have to go away really for work, but then quite a number of them do come back. There's a strong a strong feeling for the mod and for Gaelic. A lot of our children are taught in Gaelic, and they hold the mods. One's just taken place last week in Tobermory, and so we get some really good singers, children with super confidence, standing up, playing instruments and singing, reciting poetry and having conversations in Gaelic. So I think that's probably about it. You want to add anything, Donald?
Certainly, coming into this area 12 years ago, I sensed an incredible sense of community, certainly compared to the central belt. Although, around here, folk will say, "Oh, it's not how it used to be." But yes, I think there is a really good sense of community, sparsely populated area, so you tend to know a lot of folk. After the fish farms, the health service is probably one of the larger employers. There is a small nursing home. It's not currently in use, and that's maybe a political topic at the moment. And education, as Ella was saying, we've got the high school, which has been here now 20 years. And that there are 5 small feeder primary schools.
It sounds like there's quite a lot of community who really care about one another and their roots and the culture. Steve, you've just recently moved to the area. I wonder, could you give us your first impressions of the people that are in and around there?
Yeah, sure. So when you say just moved to the area, I really have literally just moved to the area. I've been visiting here over the last months with a view to moving to this area. And I finally arrived here last night. But yeah, my first impressions are an incredibly friendly place. So whenever you pass anybody, meet anybody, there is time and an acknowledgement. It's an incredibly beautiful place. And it's a place with a rich and a deep Christian heritage as well. So the place I'm moving to is Kilmaloo, which is a place where the Abernethy Trust have run an outdoor centre for many years, and which will be redeveloping as a Christian retreat centre with a place of prayer and nature and adventure. And that name Kilmaloo refers to the prayer cell of St Maluag, who was based over on Lismore and created or developed dozens of Christian communities around the north of Scotland. So there's that kind of heritage. And when you look at the place names and just dig into the heritage a little bit, this is a place that's been incredibly important for the Christian heritage of the whole nation.
So a place of significant importance for our Christian heritage. That's what I'm taking away from just getting a bit of a picture, learning about our area. Now, Donald, you mentioned some of the changes that were happening from the Presbytery mission plan. And you also mentioned about the opening of a new building. So I guess if that's the last page in the book, if the opening of the church building is towards the end of the book, sorry for the spoiler if I've done that. How about you take us back to the beginning of this journey and where all these changes came from. How did all of this begin for you?
I think for a number of years, there's been a realization that in the sparsely populated areas here, it was becoming more and more difficult to sustain the old buildings. And currently, we are in negotiations with the local community around Strontian in the hope that the church there can move into community ownership and be developed as a heritage centre, but retaining the use of the building for church purposes. We all know that the church is a very important part of the community for many folk, if only for the milestone moments in life to be marked. So that's one thing that's going on around here. Back in 2018, the church at Kilhoan, Ardnamurchan Parish Church, the building had some serious health and safety issues. It was not the first building to be really beyond use. And after some exploration of possibilities to develop that site, it was agreed that the time had come to put that building on the open market. It's subsequently been sold, and to look to a small, modest building fit for the 21st century. And yeah, it's been a very exciting journey to see that come to fruition. And over the last 5 or 6 weeks, worship has happened there, often with as many as 45, 50 folk gathering. And tomorrow, the moderator will be with us for the formal opening of the church there. But it certainly brought the whole community together, many community events that will be happening in the hall, in the church, but it will be used as a hall, a community space as well, and by other churches. There's a really good ecumenical spirit around the whole area here. Church leaders from Church of Scotland, the Free Church, the Episcopalian Church. There's a good gathering that recently hasn't met as frequently, but often in the past, every second month, church leaders from a number of different organisations and churches have come together. And we certainly hope that at Kilhoan that ecumenical spirit is kept alive.
Sounds such a picture of unity in terms of where this new life is. Ella, you've been involved with the faith communities and the communities up there for quite some time. And when the news came through and the realisation that your church building was going to close and be sold off, how were people responding to that? Were folks sad about it, or were they very pragmatic, or were they something else? What was the mood in and around the church at that time?
I think that given that there's Harrickle and Ardnamurchan were linked, but there are 22 miles between the two churches. So obviously, and it takes you an hour to go from one to the other. So one of the problems when the church had to be closed was that apart from it being the only church of any denomination in Kilhoan and within 22 miles, was the feeling of loss as well. We had the stories of, well, I was christened here, I got married here, my parents and so on. So for quite a lot of people, the sense of history and personal history, the loss of it was a major issue. Some were more pragmatic, and certainly initially there was a thought that the church might be able to be restored, but it was going to cost about $500,000 to do that. And you're talking about a small congregation, 18 members, and with an average attendance to a Sunday service at that time of about 15 to 20. So not a great deal of money, even if it was restored, to keep the church going. So yes, there was a lot of sense of bereavement, a lot of sadness. I was going to say anger, but not quite anger. Feeling of injustice. Why should our church close? And they moved into the centre and managed to keep the services going there. But obviously, that's not quite the same as having your own place. But yes, there was a great sense of loss. Quite a lot of we get a lot of visitors coming who are very supportive of the church, and one of the dilemmas was that we started collecting for a restoration of the church, and when it was decided that the church was going to be closed and put on the open market, one of the dilemmas was, what do we do with this money that people have given us for a restoration, and we're not going to restore the church. So there were a lot of questions like that going through people's minds.
No wonder there must have been a lot of emotions and hopes and confusions maybe within that. Before I bring in Neil and Steve, I'm just wondering, when you were meeting in that community centre and you're in the place for some of that loss and for some already thoughts turning to collecting, restoring, being aware of something else. I'm just wondering, what was your sense of God moving in your midst in all of that?
There was a huge amount of disappointment and perhaps maybe confusion, not understanding, probably feeling that God wasn't answering prayers in the way that people wanted them answered. We ended up with the representatives from the general trustees coming up and saying, even if you got grants, we can't support them because the central church just doesn't have the finance to support. When somebody applies for a grant, the central church has to say that they will foot the bill if something goes wrong, and the church was not in a position to do that. And so it was sort of one blow after another, which left people feeling quite low. So in the sense of God moving through the community at that time, I think the feeling was that he wasn't. And it wasn't until things started to happen after that there was a sense of we just had to wait and see what happened.
How interesting.
I'd just been minister of the Acharacal and Ardnamurchan area since the 1st of January this year. And prior to that, I'd only occasionally been down at Kilhowan at the community centre, occasionally for communion services and things like that. And although, as Ella was saying, there's that sense of disappointment and where is God? I think I would want to say that there was a real sense of that the church is the people, and there was certainly a vibrancy around the worship, albeit in the community centre, and there were funeral services and baptisms. All these things still happened around the church community. I think something else that I would want to say is that with a sparsely populated community, that there's a sense in which we're penalised, maybe isn't the right word, but just because there are few people, the community, the congregation of Ardnamurchan is in fact one of the most generous giving congregations in the country. And if you take the total income and then divide it through by the very small congregation, the per capita giving is one of the highest, if not the highest, in Scotland. And although numbers are small, I keep reminding myself that the percentage of the population that is engaged in the life of the church is so much higher than anything I ever saw when I was in the Central Belt. And that can be difficult to hold that when at one level it seems there isn't enough money, there aren't enough people to keep things going, but they're incredibly committed and generous folk in these small, sparsely populated communities.
So you've got a people of real goodness in that sense, and even in their loss and everything that you were going through with the building, there was a sense that we are the body of Christ, as in the church, not just in the stones, but the living stones. And that what I was intrigued to hear there is that even in this place of emotion and sadness, there was the worship, and people were still lifting their eyes up to God. And it sounds as though there was that absolute core belief that God is always bringing goodness. He's always bringing blessing. And it just sound as though your faith and people's faiths were really hung on that. Neil, I'm wondering what's your thoughts about what we're hearing so far.
Yes, it's encouraging to hear of a building being used so well as a thoroughfare and a hub, and the ability to use community centre and other spaces for gathering and worship and service. What does church look like beyond buildings in the rural areas, Donald, Ella?
That's a difficult one, Neil.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there is a kind of latent spirituality around the whole area. It can be hard, encouraging others into the life of the church. And I think, as soon as you take something away, it's then that folk come and you're not going to close the church that I don't go to, but it is important as part of the community. I think there is so much more that can and should be done to take the church beyond the walls of the church and being seen as light and salt within the whole community. And it probably is true that over recent years there has been rather, understandably, but too much focus on buildings and kind of getting through some of the difficulties and decline that we keep talking about. But so much opportunity to reach out to the whole community, who probably appreciate the church's presence much more than we really think.
It's all about relationships, isn't it? And I suppose your relationships with people in the areas that you're working in are really important, and the relationships between church members and their neighbours and communities is really important. I wonder, is it, we're trying to cover the whole of the land with ministry and service. Is it beyond us now, or is that something that we should be holding on to?
I personally would want to hold on to the third article declaratory that puts every square inch of Scotland within a parish, and I probably have one of the largest charges in the land, as I mentioned earlier, representing at least 2% of the area of Scotland. And at the end of the day, there is only so much that I can do. But I think one of the really important things, and increasingly so, one of the important things to do is to build up the people of God, and particularly in terms of sharing the leadership of worship and pastoral care and all that the church does. This year, Ella and I are very fortunate in that there's a probationer minister also working with us, and Jade will be here until at least the end of the calendar year. But always at the back of our mind, we're thinking, how do we sustain weekly worship in some places, twice a month in others, on an ongoing basis with two full timers, and we need to look to ways of allowing the church to share in the leadership of what we're doing.
Indeed, thank you.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing the beginnings of that, and a number of elders, becoming more confident and committed to leading worship. Another quite exciting thing that we're doing, I love the gadgets and all the tech stuff, and when there are 5 Sundays in the month, which happens 4 or 5 times in any calendar year, we're having a hybrid service. So rather than folks sitting in one church just watching what's happening elsewhere, a service might begin in one place, and now we're going to hear our readings, and they come in from another venue. There have been a few technical hitches, but we're getting there, and we're ironing those things out, and looking to how we can best be a 21st century church, and reaching folk not just in the church buildings, but also from the comfort of their own home with different online options.
Excellent, good for you.
That's really exciting. Yeah. Steve, I'm wondering what your thoughts are as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck some of the things we've heard about the nature of this area. I mean, I suspect a lot of listeners to this podcast, of course, they know about rurality and how much the Highlands and Islands in particular is a rural community. But when you hear things like, well, it's 22 miles between these two linked churches, and in many parts of the country, we'd drive past 2 or 3 dozen churches in that distance. And then I think what you shared, Donald, about the generosity of people and the percentage of people engaged in whatever way, that kind of paints a side to rural church which is often not widely understood. I think that there is a depth of roots and a lot of connections that are not always there in other kinds of places. You talk about latent spirituality. I mean, I'm pleased you mentioned the tech side, Donald, because I know, looking from afar, you seem to be a person who's been quite innovative in using technology, not just in the context you just described, but also in linking people together and facilitating prayer across the area as well. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, at the beginning of lockdown, well, prior to that, I had already dabbled a little bit in live streaming, and I was familiar with Zoom, and so I kind of took to that quite readily, and we moved into some live stream things at the beginning of lockdown, and then onto a pre-recorded video that we're still, Ella and I and a small team of folk are still putting that together on a weekly basis. And every week since the middle of March 2020, I have done a wee Wednesday evening prayer, and it's just a Bible reading, a wee reflection that often is just kind of off the cuff with something that's happened that day, and a prayer and a blessing. And there can often be not huge numbers, but 15, 20 sometimes actually live at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday evening. But by the following week, many folk will have watched it at some other time. And folk all around the world are engaging with that. And although my primary responsibility is to the local parishes here, I think there's something that we need to build on with that wider community, many of whom have connections with the area. I had an email recently from someone in Los Angeles, thanking me for the outdoor shots of some of the beauty of Loch Aber, and that all is pointing folk towards the beauty of God's creation. So yeah, I'm a big fan of using technology to the glory of God.
That is a wonderful statement. Using the technology for the glory of God. It's just brilliant. And yet again, what we're hearing from you is just how you are responding, your godly response to the circumstances and the situations where you are sent or where you find yourself. And it takes me back into that journey that we were talking a bit about on that, if we think about emerging Emmaus, that Emmaus road, that here you are, you were in that community centre, you were meeting, you had the beginning, the new shoots of some dreams and hopes, and you've got all this fantastic equipping that's coming, and people are being raised up as leaders, and going into what you've got in your heart just now and beyond, because no doubt God has good things ahead for you all. And when you're in that community centre, when you were meeting there and you had all this, the kind of the changing into the concept and the thought of a new building for yourself, I suppose I'm just thinking about, was there a significant turning point? For example, I'm wondering, did you have a prayer meeting and it just, you hit on this idea, or was there a more gentle, slow movement to where you were then going? How did that come about? What can you tell us about that?
I think people had to get to rock bottom before they would consider anything else, which I felt. I was sitting here feeling a bit guilty that I left everybody thinking everybody was so depressed about it. But in order to move on, I think you've got to start and say goodbye to the old. And as we started to think what the future would hold, we had to come up with some practical suggestions. Financially, it wasn't going to be possible to restore the church. And even if we had, financially, it wouldn't have been possible to sustain it. And so we had to look around and think what else could be done. And this is where we started to look at we had a part of the glebe land that would be available. And so it's not huge. So that was going to dictate the size of whatever building we could put on it. We had a certain amount of money. There is a certain amount of expertise in and around the village. Not all those people who are, our builders and so forth come to church. But what we started to do was to start and ask people if they would help, and nobody said no. And so the church was starting to move out, if you like, to see who we needed to ask. And gradually the vision of what we might manage came about. We still didn't have enough money to do that. And so we did a lot of the planning and had an idea of what would be possible and what would be feasible and what would be the right size for the population and the sort of attendance that we would normally get. Although the presbytery planning was going through, and all of that's had a bad press, and all the making the parishes larger and larger, but it served our purpose, because when the plan for our area was that the parishes would unite and we would come down to one minister from two. When that happened, there was no longer any need for another manse, two manses. We just needed one manse. And so when the manse was sold, that provided the money, the necessary money for us to build the church. So we'd gone in a relatively short period of time. And remember, this COVID was taking place during this time as well. We went from a feeling of really being low and really not knowing what to do. We had the money that people had generously contributed, and what were we going to do with it if we weren't going to restore the church? And then we started to look practically and see what was feasible. Still didn't have the money, and we did reach a point where we'd spent so much money on getting surveys done, and it surprised us all, I think, the amount that it cost. I mean, an example was that at the entrance of the glebe land, there were some sycamore trees, and we had to get a tree expert in to inspect these trees. That cost us over £1,000. And then he said, oh, well, this is going to be the entrance. It's going to cost you X £1,000 to protect the roots. Well, eventually we got agreement to cut the tree down, but we'd spent about £2,000 to £3,000 in that process. And so you're just thinking, you're watching this money that people have given drain away, and you're thinking, do we stop or do we go on? And we thought, well, yes, we do go on. And then we were able to sell the manse, and that meant that we could put everything into place. So having been rock bottom, and then having reached certain points, and I describe it a bit like the Indiana Jones movie. Do you remember where Sean Connery is his father and he's across a chasm, and Indiana Jones has to get across that chasm, but there's no obvious staircase between him and his father. Well, that was exactly what it was like. You had to step out and just trust that there was another step there. And there it was.
I think one of the things that struck me Sunday there was that the first time I had led a full service at our Ardnamurchan church, and there's such a joy and satisfaction with the new church, and everyone's really excited, and folk are rallying around while they're all making sandwiches and goodies for tomorrow's celebrations. And I'd been putting together a wee kind of the story of Ardnamurchan Church. And of course, this isn't the first new church building. It's at least the fourth building that's been around since the 12th century. And buildings come and buildings go, but the church, the story of faith, continues. There are a couple of really nice wee pieces of the old being carried into the new. And the cross on the outside of the new church is a wooden cross that had been in Sana Mission Hall, which was I was never there, but a small, was it a tin hut?
Yeah, it was.
Down by Sana Beach, and that cross has been incorporated into the new, and the cross behind the communion table in the sanctuary has been fashioned from a pew from the immediately past old church. So there's something of that continuity of the story. But I'm sure folk don't forget all the stories and memories from the old church that they remember. But there's a huge joy and contentedness in now having a building, a place to worship, and a place from which to go and to serve the community.
What creativity! It's really fantastic story of faith that has such creativity within it. Things like that cross, and I love hearing that kind of story that you're carrying that kind of the DNA threads through, and it's just continuing, because that's faith, isn't it? We see Jesus, he just continues all the way through, and certainly by the sounds of it, your community there just has Jesus written all the way through in terms of faith. It's really fantastic. And you've touched on, just before I come to Neil and Steve again as we come to an end, you've already been sharing about some of your hopes and dreams in terms of how the new church building is going to be used ecumenically and from community organisations. But I think you've also got some hopes there about how the house, the Glebe House and the church might be used by other ministers who bring up church groups to come and stay. I think maybe you've already had a group up to stay. Can you just give us a little bit on that angle? Because I think it's yet another creative idea that you have.
Yeah, for many years, the church house at Kilhoan and the new church is within the glebe land around that. It has been available for visiting preachers, and over the summer months, the former parish of Ardnamurchan tended to be able to keep going over the summer months without always relying on the minister coming down from a caracal. And so that's been continuing, and this year one of the visiting ministers, Keith Mack, was able to bring a group of youngsters, and they were able to run a children's holiday club and some youth activities. There was a barbecue after church in the new church, one of the first ever services there. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, with it being such a large area, we have to draw on resources like that. And while a bit of me would love to be able to be down at Ardnamurchan Church, every week for worship, that the reality is that we need those other people, visiting preachers, building up a lay worship team here, and that sort of thing. So I was actually away on holiday at the time of the beginning of August, when there was the holiday club and the youth activity. But yeah, great that those things can happen. And what a beautiful spot for someone to have a wee bit of holiday in exchange for a Sunday's a Sunday service. But yeah, lots of exciting possibilities.
That was just brilliant. Just building up, equipping the people of God to do the works of the ministry, yourself, and creatively drawing on others as well. It's such a great, encouraging story. Neil, Steve, what are your final thoughts? What is you taking away from today?
I think one thing I'm taking away is something you said, Ella. You said we asked people for help and nobody said no. And I think that's such a great thing to hear, because so often as churches we like to be the ones who are helping. We like to be the ones who are giving, and we may be sometimes a bit reluctant to be the askers, to be in the weak position, to be saying, we need your help. But I think when we go and ask for help, it kind of strengthens relationships as well, doesn't it? And draws people in who might not otherwise be. And very biblical. I was thinking when you said that, I thought, yeah, Jesus turning to Zacchaeus up a tree, I'm coming to your house for dinner tonight. Not I'm inviting you for dinner, but I'm coming to your place. And then, related to that time and again, you came to that point where you couldn't see the steps, the next steps. It required that step of faith. And then, one thing led to another. And I think, people who are listening to this, there's just a great principle there, isn't there? Whether it's a rural context, whether it's an urban context, we come to those places where we don't know. And we're required to step into the unknown and to trust. And when we do that so often, the next thing leads us into the next thing. So, yeah, thanks so much for sharing your story of these recent years.
And the thing that struck me, among other things, is the latent spirituality that you described, Donald, in the outer parts of our land. And I love cycling out in the west coast there, not far from you, and up and down. And there's a lot of people who have sought that part of the world to get away from different things. But what I've also sensed is that there is an in-touchness with creation. There's an in-touchness with, I suppose, the Celtic type of spirituality that actually can recognise and notice God in and around the wild parts. And so I take heart from that, from what you're saying. It's a difficult question. Where is the church? How's the church at work beyond these walls? But I'm heartened by the encouragement that you describe, in terms of growing leaders and equipping God's people to be out there, to be helping people to make these connections with the latent spirituality that's around. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been great to be talking with you and to be challenged and encouraged. I think it's good to talk through what we're doing and to reflect on what we're doing. So thank you for that opportunity.
Been brilliant hearing from you, Donald and Ella. It really has. Thank you for all your encouraging stories, your honesty as well about this walk that you've had with God and that you're continuing on. I think one of my takeaways was something you said was, what else can be done? And it was in the context of, we might not be able to do X, Y, Z, or we might not have this, but what else can be done? And certainly in everything that I've heard from you today, it's been a case of, yeah, but what else can be done? Whether it's 22 miles between the churches, but what else can be done? Whether it's we've not got a lot of people, but what else can be done? And I really hope that our listeners to this story, that you would like to go up and bless the churches up there with your group from church and go and help them be involved in their ministry life in the way that they are, and catch some of that creative vision from them as well. What else can be done? Well, Donald and Ella, we bless you mightily in all that you are doing, and just really look forward to hearing more of the stories from the Kilcoen area. Thank you so much to everybody for listening today, and thank you to you for sharing your God story with us.
In your neighbourhood trudged two dumped Jesus friends, drowning before dawning, moving through a maze of misery to an amazing Emmaus encounter. Emerging Emmaus.
Good grief, our dream is dead. Going home instead, comfort of my bed.
Good grief, the pain. Hope hard to sustain, love down the drain.
Good grief, where have you been? What we've seen, blown to smithereens.
Good grief, how our hearts burned, our minds turned, all we learned.
Good grief, don't go away, come in to stay. You've shown the way.
Good grief, how he broke the bread with hands that bled, then disappeared.
Good grief, Jesus alive? No need to strive, chance to thrive. Jesus alive.
Good grief, no time to waste. Now we have a taste, to Jerusalem with haste.
Emerging Emmaus. A well-kent lament echoes through the years. How long? How long? Good as is the grieving process, may it be a means to access visions and dreams of Christ's kingdom come. Emmaus, emerge from the gloom. Come, Holy Spirit, come. So for future podcasts, join us via the Sanctuary First website, Facebook page and app, and also via Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Come on, tune in.